Good morning, good night, good afternoon, everyone. Today, I just want to talk about community credentials. And I'm so excited to talk about this because I think it could be one of the most impactful and effective ways of getting mass adoption for self-sovereign identity as a whole, and more specifically, a Tala Prism identity within Cardano. And it could have some absolutely massive impact for growing the ecosystem and just making this completely new economies that we're starting to kind of work within. So to start, I just want to let's look at some of the promising paths for adoption for a Tala Prism and identity as a whole. One of the key ones that people have kind of talked about and in the Cardano ecosystem is this kind of in Africa. So at the moment, there's a lot of countries that don't have a lot of infrastructure for their government systems, financial banking systems, and all of those kind of areas, and they can leapfrog those systems into these new systems that have a lot of benefit. In the finance side, we have across the globe, like central banks debasing their own currency, and then the banking system just providing very little return, and it's not really working very well, and the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, just a falling apart financial system. And DeFi has just shown a massive growth. And you can see in the context of identity, how with regulation, the identity could be an essential add-on to those protocols. So that's what we've been talking a lot about RealFi and Cardano, if you've not heard, which is basically just kind of taking that identity and mixing it with DeFi so you can prove all of the kind of involvement you've had in DeFi so it's all can meet that kind of new regulation that's starting to come through. That could be a massive driver for adoption for identity with the right regulations in place. And then the third kind of area that identity could be really quickly adopted is in the community. So in the community, we have Catalyst that has nearly, I think it's just around a billion in funds that's likely to go be higher in the future. And also, a wide array of people working within the Catalyst, Cardano, protocols, libraries, loads of people who are kind of interacting with the ecosystem and have this kind of massive potential to how can we kind of let them interact with each other in a way that's beneficial to create this new form of identity, whether that's kind of like reputation, these contributions, this proving of skill, all of these ways that we kind of interact, and how can we kind of have that bottoms up approach for the community making their own economy. Now, the reason I'm so excited about the community as one of the most exciting paths to adoption is in both within Africa and in the finance side, you have loads of chance for friction. In Africa, you can have governments that some may quickly adopt and accept, and some may reject. The technology. You have the kind of friction of this kind of awareness, understanding the technology, and also adoption, education kind of side. That kind of friction. In the finance side, you have some countries may make some really draconian regulations that just aren't very useful for the adoption. You could have some that completely reject it because we're challenging the central bank's kind of control of the monetary policy and having their own fiat currencies. It challenges that. So there's a happy path where everything goes right on those in both of those segments, but there's also the path that there's lots of friction and lots of things people need to learn and regulation to go through for that path, that chance for identity adoption to really kind of take off. In the community side, these blockers don't exist. Like there is no, like the people in the community are the most engaged. They have the most technical expertise. They understand the technology. So that awareness education is already kind of there. And we don't have any other bodies. We don't have any like governments or corporate bodies that can prevent you from using and starting to create these kind of credentials. So you have the really fast feedback loop, and you have a super engaged kind of community that will, with the right credentials, can actually benefit from using them. So you can actually create your completely new flywheel. And as soon as that gets started, everything else gets dragged in. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And what better way to go through that then is let's look at like how that could pan out. So this bottom-up adoption path, community credentials basically looks at what different, whether that's the DeFi protocols or Catalyst kind of community projects, all of those different projects could start issuing credentials that give some sort of benefit to the holder. Or how they interact with the protocol, they could get some benefit. If they do X certain task or complete certain thing, then they could be issued a credential that gives them some sort of benefit. Some examples are things like, say, participating in live sessions or completing workshops. All of these things are very simple things, but the accumulation of them help to kind of present this picture of someone's reputation, their involvement, their contributions. Super important starting point. As that moves on, we've got things like Catalyst. So I'd love to be able to prove as a community advisor that I've done 20 assessments in different funding rounds. In my voter, I want to prove that since Fund 3, I've voted in every single one. I've voted on 100, 200 proposals. I'm a proposer. I want to prove that I've been funded in the 5 different proposals. And, this is my interaction. Here's my contributions. Once we can start to look at those kind of things, you start to kind of make this much wider picture of how you're engaging in the ecosystem. Moving on from that, we've got things like individual credentials. So it's not just community projects such as Gimba Labs, Catalyst Swarm, the Catalyst School, the DeFi protocols. It's not just them that could issue the credentials. It could also be the individuals. So if I've got a few credentials to say I've been involved, I'm a community advisor, I've been participating, then people can understand and see that I have some small form of reputation. If I've then completed, let's say, a Catalyst School workshop to learn about the community advisor process, I could be like, oh, that mentor was really useful. I'd like to issue a credential and say that mentor was really good at their job. And because I have some form of reputation in the ecosystem, people can see that and be like, oh, great. That person has this reputation and they say that person's a good mentor. I should reach out to them. It's like, they get that kind of reputation benefit. When you move on from that, the issues with individual credentials is as soon as I, as an individual, can give some amount of benefit from issuing a credential that people are starting to use and consume, it instantly introduces this Sybil attack possibility that I just make loads of wallets and I then start issuing credentials against all of them to that person to say they've done X or they have this, that they're good for that, or whatever kind of use case. We need to better prevent that. So this is where in Ethereum you have, for Gitcoin specifically, they've attached these kind of anti-Sybil resistance kind of networks such as BrightID, Proof of Humanity, IDENA, that help kind of solve this problem. So if we can integrate that, then we can help to prevent these kind of issues. And it's at this point that just that alone, between the community projects and the individuals and trying to thinking about the anti-Sybil resistance side, if you have those kind of problems solved, then you can already make a very thriving ecosystem that just becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy that I mentioned, where new projects can make use of the existing credentials that exist and create their own. And then as the economy kind of grows with people doing their own kind of working in their own kind of use case and kind of role, there's other ones that can come in and solve different problems, and it just becomes its own separate growing economy. Now, the implication this has on this kind of corporate and government side is it forces their hand. They either have to integrate or they reject it, and there's going to be other solutions that come in this kind of Web3 decentralized approach that kind of take over their industry and look at better ways, more egalitarian ways that it can be done. And in the same light, governments also will have to kind of respond with regulation and thing. At the moment, it can be quite easy. It can be quite easy to ignore. DeFi has been the perfect example of where they can't really ignore it for too much longer because it's starting to get that kind of rate of adoption. But as you get these other kind of use cases, it helps to kind of push along that kind of regulation and speeding up the adoption of these kind of technologies, and specifically perfectly for Cardano. So for the initial credentials that we're looking at for a Fund 6 proposal being funded for, those include participation credentials and completion credentials. Now, these are really kind of simple use cases. So the examples that we have are attending an after town hall Catalyst Swarm session, or participating in a Gimba Labs playground session for the participation credentials. And for the completion ones, you could contribute to a Gimba Labs project-based learning exercise, or you could complete a Catalyst School workshop as another example. Now, the real benefit to this is these credentials have got really low privacy concerns. They're super easy to implement. They're like the simplest thing you can get. They're not necessarily super simple at the beginning, but obviously they are the kind of the most simple use case, simple thing you can think of. And then the real kind of other benefit is that it's got freedom on how to use the credentials. So one community project could be thinking about participation in how they're doing it, but then another community project can completely use that same tooling and infrastructure for any other kind of use case with that similar kind of thing in mind. So the innovation really is kind of let to the community once you have this kind of base infrastructure and these base kind of set of tools, so they can think of new, fresh ideas that kind of start to add value for simple use cases. And when we look at that initial process we got for Fund 6, what we want to do for Fund 7 is do an extension of it. So this community kind of credentials approach, that's the starting point of the participation and the completion ones. And with the Fund 7 proposals, we have Community Credentials 2, which basically looks to extend it. So whether that's infrastructure, new credential types, or other kind of forms of collaboration, and what's the next thing? What's the next thing that we can do to really help to grow that kind of community credentials approach to getting adoption? And the second proposal we have is for skills credentials. So we're looking at things like Haskell, Plutus, Atala Prism. How can we have some like a skills authentication system with some governance process to describe this is how you can prove and be verified that you know that certain skill, which is great for the community, because then someone can show that they've got skills in Plutus and everyone can see that. They can kind of showcase that and everyone can kind of reach out to them if they want to start collaborate. So it's a good way of sort of showcasing skills. And in terms of our execution approach for that Fund 6 proposal and any subsequent proposal in this kind of community credentials approach is massive focus on collaboration. So the more people who can get involved, the better, to kind of bring in more ideas and just maximize that kind of quality kind of outcome by bringing the different community perspectives, bringing all the different things that could work for us credentials, and trying to get to the best outcome that benefits is maximizes that return on intention. And the better we do that, so it collaborates and people can get involved and present ideas and iterate, the better environment we have for education. So the contributors, for one, will get all that awareness and the different skill sets involved. But then as well as that, we can document the process and what's been done, so then the wider community can also benefit from it. And then the third thing is the approach is completely focused on this gradual evolution. It's really looking for the really simple use cases, and then what's next? What's the next kind of bit of infrastructure or credential that will help to move it to the next step, to widen that kind of use case, to more people can get involved, so you can make that kind of flywheel effect for adoption. In terms of partnerships, we have Gimba Labs, who are an absolute core part of making this work. So they've been focused on project-based learning. So they've been taking people in and doing a Plutus-based learning exercises, so they can learn about Plutus and do like real-world kind of use cases and projects, so they get that kind of experience. When we got funded for the community credentials proposal, we realized this is the perfect place for this. This is highly collaborative. It maximizes education, and for a community bottoms-up approach to doing credentials, where else would you want to do this? So all of our proposals, we're going for that process, and we'd highly encourage anyone who's looking to contribute or learn to get involved and go to the gimbalabs.com website, and you can find their Discord to start interacting with the community and just learn and contribute. And then second partnership we've got is LearnerShape, which is why we made that skills credentials proposal. So in Fund 6, LearnerShape got funded to work on their protocol that's going to look at how to do all this skills authentication. And we're looking to be kind of the pilot use case for that and put it through this kind of collaborative learning exercise. And we're going to pick between the kind of Plutus, Atala Prism, or maybe just generally Haskell kind of areas as the perfect kind of skills, first skill use case that we can kind of push into. And what we'll do is we'll work with LearnerShape to try and make sure we implement the protocol properly and maximize that kind of potential chance to produce a useful credential for the community. So to get involved, this is fully contributor focused. So if you have any developer, design, product skills, or anything that you're super interested in, this kind of massive potential for how community credentials could impact the community and grow really fast, please just get involved. You can learn through this process, and any of the funding that we receive for these proposals is going straight to the contributors. That we've segmented it, so there's a little bit to go to coordinators for making sure stuff happens and getting the right outcomes, but then most of it just goes to contributors. And like our aim as PACE as an organization is to not receive any funding at all. If people want it, we'll take up the coordination and the contribution side of it. That's fantastic, and it's more to the contributors the better. Like, we're trying to maximize that collaboration, that environment where people feel are both educationally supported, but they've also got that financial support, making that perfect kind of learning ecosystem so people can spend more time worrying about trying to maximize that return on intention and the quality they produce, rather than worrying about whether they're going to making enough money and whether they can learn fast enough in the environment. And so we're documenting as we go. So it's still quite bare at the moment, but if you keep checking on that, if you just want to be a lurker, then absolutely fine. If you check that kind of Git book, we'll link it below. You can just follow what gets done as we progress. And if you want to contribute, then as I mentioned before, go to the Gimba Labs site and join the Discord server. That is the main way to get involved. And we'd love to just chat about anything, or share your ideas. Like, it could be any kind of feedback or just sharing ideas. That we'd love to hear from you. And that's it for this one. So hopefully you agree that community credentials is a super exciting area. I think it could see explosive growth if it's done right with the right kind of credentials in place. So super excited to see how this one goes. And yeah, any feedback or comments, please reach out, and we'd love to talk to anyone with different ideas. So thank you very much, guys. I will catch you in the next one.